Hello everyone! Today we're diving into some gripping stories of caving and cave diving incidents that took a wrong turn. By popular demand, we've also included a few tales of horrible fates. Thank you for tuning in. Let's jump right in. In March of 2004, 6 British soldiers went to explore the Alpazat Cave in Mexico as part of a recreational team-building exercise. Their fun trip quickly turned into a fight for their lives when a flash flood sealed their exit. The divers faced even more troubles after they were rescued. The team's military ties and their strange equipment caused the Mexican government to charge them with searching for dangerous and highly illegal materials. What were UK military men doing in Alpazat, and how did they escape? Stay tuned to find out. Before we dive into the video, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have subscribed to this channel. Our subscriber rate has grown from 8% to 13%, which is truly amazing. If you're new here, simply click the subscribe button, like this video, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads. Now let's get into the video. Charles Milton, Chris Mitchell, John Rowe, Toby Hamnett, Jonathan Sims, and Simon Cornhill were all part of the Combined Services Caving Association, or CSCA. The CSCA provides training and recreational opportunities for active service personnel in the UK Armed Forces. The CSCA also helps beginners attain qualifications in caving that they can take into their civilian lives after they leave service. While the CSCA caters to active military personnel, the Alpazat team included a civilian scientist, and Jonathan Sims was actually a retired Army officer. The active caving team was supported by 7 additional CSCA members who stayed at the surface. The team had been planning the trip for 3 years, and they were finally ready to set out on an expedition to Puebla, Mexico, to explore the Alpazat Cave. Officially known as the Free and Sovereign State of Puebla, the region is one of Mexico's 32 states. Puebla is renowned for its beautiful mountains that connect to the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt and the Sierra Madre Oriental Range. Deep in the dense landscape of Puebla is town of Quetzalán, which is home to the pyramids of Yohualichin that date back as far as the year 1200 AD. Quetzalán is nestled near a tropical rainforest with plenty of humidity, along with multiple waterfalls like La Cascada de las Brisas, creating an ideal climate for the Alpazat cave network to develop over the centuries. Locally known as Cueva de Alpazat, the cave system was first surveyed by British countrymen of the CSCA team back in the 1970s. So far, explorers and scientists have mapped over 60 miles of the Alpazat cave system that extends deep underground. On March 14, 2004, the UK caving team made it to Puebla. One day later, they entered Alpazat and expected their journey to take roughly 1.5 days, but they took enough food supplies to last 10 days. The trip ended up taking longer than expected. After 2 days, the CSCA team was almost out of Cueva de Alpazat. They were about 35 minutes from the entrance. But suddenly, an unforecast storm ripped through the Puebla rainforest, bringing torrential downpours that caused a flash flood deep underground, trapping the 6 Britons. The team quickly fled deeper into the cave to escape the rising water. Jonathan Sims was already retired. He had faced a number of high-stress situations during his military career, but nothing could prepare him for the terror that he faced in Alpazat. In interviews, he highlights the extreme physical toll that caving and armed combat training can place on the body, but he explains how being trapped is a different beast. The mental impact of being trapped deep below the surface was unlike anything the team of soldiers and officers had faced before. In an interview with the UK news outlet, The Guardian, Sims called the feeling of being trapped absolutely soul-destroying. The feeling of sheer dread was amplified by the sounds of the roaring storm that brought the floods in the first place. The sound of rushing water echoed throughout the narrow enclosure of the cave like drums banging in their ears. As they fled deeper into the cave to stay out of the rising water, their chances of getting out got worse. They managed to find an ideal safe spot on a cliff that extended 15 feet over an underground river, and they set up camp. While they were safe from the flood, their troubles were far from over. Most caves are fairly cold, with the average temperature being around a chilly 48 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. However, Alpazat's location directly below a temperate rainforest made the cave much hotter and more humid than other caves. To compensate for the rising temperatures, the team had to strip naked, removing another layer of protection that humans take for granted and further adding to the psychological burden of their nightmarish experience. Although they brought enough food to last 10 days, they had no idea how long it would take for them to be rescued, or if they even would make it out alive. Because of the uncertainty, they had to ration food, which made them weak and teared. To stay sane, the CSCA team cut a single piece of paper into 52 squares and used the scraps to play cards. Although they had to eat less, their meals were high quality, and they even had some comfort food like chocolate cake, which helped ease their burden. The CSCA team was also equipped with hydro-powered lights that could harness the flow of the subterranean river near camp, so they didn't have to worry about running out of light anytime soon. Using their light, the team read 2 novels that they brought with them to keep morale up. The cavers also had sleeping bags and water purifiers, which were vital because the flooded waters were filled with dirt and bacteria. The team also had access to a mole phone, which allowed them to contact their above-ground base. Mole phones are a type of primitive technology dating back to the 1960s. Mole phones use a single sideband 87 kHz radio wave, which has since been replaced with models like the Nikola system and the Hay phone. The soldiers told stories of where they planned to go eat after they were rescued, and they talked about their lives back home, where they grew up, and who they were to keep their memory alive as the abyss gnawed at their minds. So far, the story sounds like a frightening but textbook cave rescue story. However, this story has as many twists as the Alpazat caves themselves. Normally, cavers go missing, and friends and family members report the case to the authorities. In this case, the CSCA team had direct contact to the surface team, so they could have dispatched a rescue mission almost immediately. But they didn't. The team on the surface waited almost a week, 5 days before they contacted Mexican police and rescue teams. Along with contacting local rescue teams, the CSCA also reached out to 2 elite divers from the Cave Rescue Organization, Richard Stanton and Jason Mallinson. The Cave Rescue Organization, or CRO, is a group of volunteers based out of northern England. It's one of the world's best rescue teams, and it's the first cave rescue agency ever founded. The team also branches out to rescue animals, and they also aid in mountain rescues. Richard Stanton, who goes by Rick, has been at the heart of many world-famous cave rescue operations, making him one of the top specialists in the world. Rick got his start as a firefighter in the UK. He worked there for 25 years before retiring to lend his aid in cave rescues. While that's not most people's idea of a relaxing retirement, Rick's specialties have saved lives all over the world. He's also a member of the British Cave Rescue Council, which is the governing body for cave exploration in the UK. In his backyard swimming pool, Stanton flexed his invention skills by testing and developing 2 closed-circuit rebreather devices, which absorb the normally toxic CO2 from divers' exhalation and recycles unused oxygen back into reservoir, which means divers need less equipment. Rick also modified his rebreathers to attach to his side rather than his back, which helps him fit into smaller spaces. Rick Stanton also set 2 world records. He set his first world record in 2004 with his fellow rescuer John Valanthan for the greatest depth achieved in a British cave at 249 feet in Wookey Hole. 6 years later, in 2010, Rick, Mallinson, Valanthan, and Renee Hubin set the world record for the longest cave penetration dive in Pozo Azul, with an astonishing depth of 28,900 feet. Once Stanton and Mallinson arrived, they found strong underwater currents that forced them to delay the rescue ops. As the water decreased in speed, Stanton and Mallinson still had to travel through close to 1,000 feet of flooded tunnels with low visibility and dangerously sharp rocks. The team was relieved to see Stanton emerge from the murky waters in the Alpazat cave, but their task was far from complete. Stanton and Mallinson had to teach some of the explorers how to dive. They used a small section of the water near the campsite to practice techniques that they would have to use to escape to freedom. Eventually, the rain ceased, and the flooded regions of the cave began to dry up, which helped speed up the rescue process. In spite of the improved weather, it still took the rescuers an hour and a half to get each member to safety, 45 minutes into the cave and 45 minutes out. Once they were rescued, Mexican emergency crews examined all 6 cavers and found no major injuries, but that's when things got strange. The team was then transferred to a military hospital near the capital city of Puebla, and they claimed they were studying the Alpazat cave to improve knowledge of the freshwater reservoir in the region. However, Mexican officials were suspicious. It took the above-ground CSCA team 5 days to contact Mexican authorities at the Civil Protection Agency in Puebla, and, even stranger, once the Mexican officials responded, the CSCA team refused to let them rescue the trapped cavers, which created a flurry of speculation. The team said they waited to alert the authorities because they wanted to keep quiet, but that raised more alarms. What did they want to keep quiet about? The CSCA team knew that the Alpazat caves haven't been explored by many people. The caves can only be tackled by experts, and the only people who have explored the cave are their fellow UK cavers. With that knowledge, it made sense to wait for Stanton and Mallinson rather than risking the lives of inexperienced local teams. However, officials found that the team had gas-detecting equipment which could be used for finding radioactive material. Fears quickly grew that the CSCA team could be surveying the area for radon and uranium, which are radioactive materials used for the production of nuclear weapons. Local and national news agencies began publishing stories on the possibility of uranium in the Quetzalan caves. However, Juan Hirose, head of the Mexican Union of Speleologists, tried to dispel the fears by reminding his countrymen that the CSCA team was known internationally, and he even worked with them in cross-country collaborations in the past. Hirose also knew the cave system well, and he proved that the caves were made of calcium carbonate, which isn't found around uranium. But that didn't stop others from calling the cavers English spies and calling for their interrogation. Once fears of illegal uranium mining were dispelled, Mexico continued to hold the CSCA team under suspicion of visa irregularities. The Mexican government required notification of active military personnel entering the country, and neither the team, the CSCA, nor the UK Armed Forces provided any notification prior to the team's journey to Puebla. Immigration officials were sent to question the 6 cavers, which sparked outrage in the UK. Officials called for a note of protest to be filed in response to the detention of their citizens, and the cavers faced up to 18 months in prison with fines of up to £180. As the situation unfolded, the cavers missed their flight home. Then, Mexico's President Vicente Fox even voiced his own concern that the cavers were there under false pretenses. Eventually, the spelunkers were freed from being trapped a second time in 2 weeks and allowed to return home to the UK. That's the outrageous story of how a group of cavers from the UK military got trapped while exploring the Alpazat cave, and how they somehow got accused of mining for uranium. We also explored the life of Rick Stanton, one of the best rescuers of all time. Rick was also at the heart of the Tam Luang Cave rescue from 2018, and we even covered a video about that rescue. Check it out in the link below. Before you go, let us know if you've ever explored one of Mexico's many world-class caves in the comments section. In the heart of America, hundreds of feet below the surface, 10 men embarked on a routine shift at the Crandall Canyon mine. They were fathers, sons, husbands, and brothers. Everyday people with extraordinary courage. But on a quiet August morning in 2007, their world shattered. The ground roared, the darkness pulsed with a terrifying energy. A monstrous collapse sealed their fate, trapping 6 miners in a tomb of rock and dust. This is a story of struggle against nature's relentless grasp, where hope wanes with each ticking second. Rescue teams rush against time, using cutting-edge tech to save their own. But the mountain fights back, every advance met with despair, every ray of hope drowned by the looming threat of another disaster. In this video, we'll explore the frantic rescue attempts, the agonizing wait for news above ground, and the devastating second collapse that claimed the lives of brave rescuers. It's a story of sacrifice, of the unwavering bond between miners, and the unyielding spirit of families who refuse to give up. But most importantly, it's a stark reminder of the unseen dangers lurking beneath the surface, a tribute to the men who provide the fuel for our lives, and a call for ensuring such tragedies never strike again. The Crandall Canyon mine is located in Emery County, Utah, part of the Wasatch Plateau coal field. It's roughly 140 miles south of Salt Lake City, 34 miles southeast of Fairview, and about 15 miles northwest of Huntington. Tucked into Crandall Canyon, it's just 1.25 miles west of where State Route 31 intersects with the main highway road, which passes through Huntington Canyon. The Crandall Canyon mine is covered by the Manti La Sal National Forest. Its surface operations span across 10 acres of previously disrupted land within the forest. The mine's permitted area sprawls over 5,000 acres, including fee land, federal leases, and state leases. The area surrounding the mine is mostly mountainous, with peaks towering over 10,000 feet within a 3-mile radius from the mine's entrance. An unnamed peak to the west, at the head of both Crandall Canyon and Blind Canyon, stands at 10,743 feet. Mill Fork Peak, about 1.2 miles south of the mine, reaches 9,885 feet. A ridgeline half a mile north of the mine entrance rises to over 9,200 feet, around 1,400 feet higher than the mine entrance itself in the canyon below. The Crandall Canyon mine is co-owned by Utah American Energy, Inc., formerly known as Andalex Resources, and the Intermountain Power Agency, IPA. Utah American, headquartered in Sandy, Utah, is a subsidiary of Murray Energy Corporation, based in Cleveland, Ohio, and owned by Robert E. Bob Murray. Genwall Resources, Inc., a division of Utah American, operates the mine. In 2008, Genwall Resources faced the highest penalty ever imposed by the U.S. government for coal mine safety violations, amounting to $1.64 million following the 2007 collapse. Mining began at the site in November 1939 and continued until September 1955, using a room and pillar method. Genwall Coal Company restarted mining operations in 1983, producing between 100,000 and 230,000 tons of coal annually. NICO bought the mine in 1989, with IPA purchasing a 50% interest the following year. By 1991, a continuous haulage system boosted production to 1 to 1.5 million tons per year. In March 1995, Genwall Resources, Inc. took over the mine and installed a longwall, doubling its capacity. 2 years later, a new longwall increased capacity to 3.5 million tons per year. A new loadout facility was constructed to handle the increased output. More federal leases were obtained to prolong the mine's life, and plans were made to install new portals on its south side for better access. Mine owners notified the state of Utah of their intention to close the mine in 2008. In 2006, the mine received citations for safety violations, including not having enough escape routes. Murray dismissed these as minor siting issues. Also, a method called retreat mining, where pillars of coal support the mine's ceiling, was being used in some areas. On March 10, 2007, a rock burst caused the north barrier pillar to collapse inward. Though no one was hurt, it forced the mine to extract coal with higher ash content. Since this coal was crucial for contracts, a decision was made on March 21st to switch to the south barrier pillar. Oddly, the March 10 incident wasn't reported to authorities as required. Although Robert Murray claimed ignorance, meeting minutes from January 2008 showed otherwise. In the early hours of August 6, 2007, while 10 men were mining coal in the Crandall Canyon mine in Utah, disaster struck as the roof suddenly collapsed. The force of the collapsing earth was so powerful that one miner who managed to escape recalled how the rushing air in the tunnel nearly overturned his pickup truck. Unfortunately, 6 miners, Carrie Allred, 58, Luis Hernandez, 23, Brandon Phillips, 24, Carlos Payan, 22, Manuel Sanchez, 41, and Don Erickson, 50, were trapped roughly 3.4 miles from the mine entrance, buried 1,500 feet underground. Seismographs in Utah and Nevada registered seismic waves measuring 3.9 to 4.0, initially mistaken for an earthquake, but later confirmed to be caused by the collapse. Shortly after the mine disaster, news crews rushed to central Utah to cover the event. The mine owner insisted that an earthquake caused the collapse, but this claim was challenged when hundreds of seismometers across the western U.S. detected seismic waves at the time of the collapse. These waves indicated sudden movement underground where the mine was situated. A mine collapse can release energy equivalent to a magnitude 3.9 earthquake, making it difficult to distinguish between an earthquake and a mine collapse based solely on seismic readings. Within 3 days, scientists began investigating to determine the cause, relying on objective measurements to unravel the mystery: earthquake or mine collapse. Rescue teams were sent right away to check the mine and start removing debris to reach the trapped miners. It was expected to take 2 to 6 weeks to clear the rubble and make the passages safe, but more seismic activity and safety worries caused delays. On Thursday, August 9, 2007, at 9:47 p.m., a drill reached over 1,800 feet into the presumed location of the trapped miners at Crandall Canyon mine. Fitted with a steel pipe, it allowed for air samples and a microphone to be sent down. By early Friday morning, August 10th, the microphone detected no signs of human activity, but initial air samples suggested the atmosphere could support life, with 20.5% oxygen and some carbon monoxide, but no methane. However, there was no carbon dioxide, which would be present if the miners were breathing. Later samples showed oxygen levels near 7%, dangerously low for survival. Initially, it was thought that the drill bit had missed its mark and sampled air from a neighboring sealed-off mine cavity. However, it was confirmed that the drill had indeed reached its target. The initial oxygen readings were likely from the borehole itself, not the actual mine cavity. At the same time, another rescue attempt involved drilling a 9-inch hole to reach another possible location of the miners when the collapse happened. This hole was meant for delivering supplies like food and water, as well as deploying a powerful robotic camera to survey the area. It reached the mine shaft on Saturday, August 11th. The robotic camera was then lowered into the collapsed mine from the 9-inch wide shaft. However, it only showed normal mining equipment, but not the missing 6 miners, as reported by a federal official on Sunday, August 12th, 2007. According to Richard Stickler, chief of the Mine Safety and Health Administration, MSHA, due to poor lighting, the camera could only see about 15 feet into the hole created by the drill, much less than its usual capability of 100 feet. On Sunday evening, August 12th, work began on a third borehole, aimed at a ventilation area at the back of the mine. Miners are trained to head to these areas if other escape routes are blocked. The hole was finished by midday on Wednesday, August 15th. However, the initial equipment couldn't pass through a bend in the hole. Just before 7 p.m. on August 15, 2007, vibrations were reported inside the mine. These vibrations, detected by geophones lowered into the borehole, lasted about 5 minutes. Stickler mentioned they could have been caused by an animal or even a falling rock. However, this activity led to a reconsideration of where to drill the fourth hole. It was decided to redirect the fourth hole toward the area where the noises were detected, about 3/4 of the way to the third hole, approximately 800 feet beyond the initial sites. The first two bore holes were aimed at where the miners were thought to be during the collapse, while the third hole targeted a ventilation area about 1,200 feet beyond those locations. By midday on August 16, 2007, 11 days after the collapse, rescue teams underground had only cleared less than half of the rubble to reach where the miners were believed to be. The walls of the tunnels kept collapsing, damaging the digging equipment and making it necessary to reinforce the structure for the safety of the crew. In the 24-hour period from August 15th to 16th, the teams managed to progress just 25 feet. So far, they had dug 826 feet into the rubble, but an estimated 1,200 feet still lay ahead. Later on August 16, 2007, around 6:30 p.m., another collapse occurred in the mine when a tunnel wall exploded outward, resulting in the deaths of 3 rescue workers and injuring 6 others. All rescue operations underground were halted, and it remained uncertain whether efforts to reach the trapped miners would continue. The 3 rescuers who lost their lives were Dale Bird Black, 49, Brandon Kimber, 29, and Gary Jensen, 53, the latter being an inspector for MSHA. On August 23, 2007, rescue workers start drilling a 6th borehole into the area where the miners were last seen. On August 25, 2007, 6th borehole reached the mine tunnel, but officials declared the space too small for the miners to have survived. Plans were made to lower a robotic camera down the hole on August 27th, with a 7th borehole also in the works. The following day, owner Bob Murray announced the closure of the tower mine due to the collapse, offering workers relocation to Illinois or Ohio. However, some workers were dissatisfied with the relocation benefits and salary adjustments. On August 28, 2007, the robotic camera couldn't reach the mine due to shifting caused by continuing seismic activity. A 7th borehole was completed on August 30th, filling with mud and debris at a rapid rate of 5 feet per hour. Owners stated no further holes would be drilled due to the high cost, instead planning to send the camera down the 4th borehole. Despite concerns, the camera was sent down on August 31st. On September 1st, 2007, federal officials called off the search after 4 weeks of unsuccessful efforts, though drilling an 8th hole wasn't completely ruled out. In October, Murray Energy sealed 3 passageways with concrete blocks, entombing the bodies inside. A report released on June 1, 2008 by University of Utah seismologists revealed the collapse's epicenter was near where miners worked and estimated the size of the collapse to be larger than initially thought. On July 24, 2008, MSHA announced its highest penalty for safety violations in a coal mine, totaling $1.85 million for the collapse. Genwall Resources was fined $1.34 million for violations linked to the deaths of 6 miners, plus nearly $300,000 for other violations. Richard E. Stickler, the top mine safety official, emphasized that the collapse wasn't caused by a natural earthquake. Additionally, a mining consultant, Agapito Associates, received a $220,000 fine for providing faulty analysis of the mine's design. Near the mine entrance, there's a trail leading to a paved area serving as a memorial for the 9 men who died in the 2007 disaster. American Monument crafted granite headstones for the 6 miners killed, while granite benches were made for memorial of the 3 rescuers who lost their lives. In Huntington, Utah, there's another memorial dedicated to the August 2007 collapses. It's a bronze statue called Heroes Among Us, created by Karen Job Templeton. Unveiled on September 18, 2008, the statue features detailed portraits of each of the 9 men who died. Standing 6 feet tall, it allows viewers to look each miner in the eye. The Crandall Canyon mine disaster remains a chilling scar on American history. It ripped families apart, exposed flaws in mining safety, and forever changed a small Utah town. While the trapped miners were never recovered, their memory lives on, a constant reminder of the sacrifices made by those who venture deep underground to fuel our world. As we close this chapter, let's carry these lessons with us. Let's remember the cost of comfort, the dangers hidden beneath the surface, and the importance of prioritizing safety in every industry. Thank you for joining us on this journey through tragedy. In 2017, two experienced divers enters in the crystal waters of Mallorca. A nightmare unfolds. A diver named Xisco Grazia vanishes into the darkness, trapped hundreds of feet underground alone, with limited air and only hope for a daring rescue mission pushing the limits of human courage and exploration. Will they reach him in time? Let's explore the true story of survival and the fight against the time in the Sapiketa cave incident. On the morning of April 15, 2017, Xisco Grazia and Guillem Mascaro parked their car and started getting their supplies together. Xisco, like many other people, looked forward to Saturdays. He almost always spent his weekends doing what he loved most. At 54 years old, Xisco was a respected geology teacher. He had spent most of his life collecting and studying rocks. This was his passion. It wasn't just about the rocks. It was about how he collected and studied them that gave his life meaning. Xisco loved being outdoors. Every Saturday, he would get up early and drive to different places to look for interesting rocks. Sometimes he would bring his friends with him, like Guillem Mascaro. They enjoyed spending time together and sharing their love of geology. For Xisco, Saturdays were not just another day of the week. They were special because they allowed him to do what he loved the most. Every weekend, he looked forward to his adventures in geology, and each trip added more joy and meaning to his life. On that mid-morning of April 15th, they were excited. They knew they would find some great rocks that day. They packed their tools, maps, and lunch. They always made sure to bring enough water and snacks for the day. Xisco was an adventurous cave diver. On that particular day, Xisco Grazia and Guillem Mascaro planned to explore parts of a cave that had never been visited before. Besides collecting rock samples, Xisco had a passion for mapping and measuring caves. But what excited him the most was the idea of being the first person to see the hidden secrets of a cave. Living on the island of Mallorca, the largest of 4 Spanish-owned islands in the Mediterranean, Xisco was in the perfect place for his adventures. These islands are located about 200 kilometers east of mainland Spain and are well-known vacation destinations. For Xisco, exploring caves was more than just a hobby. It was a thrilling quest. He enjoyed the challenge of navigating through the dark and mysterious underground passages. Each cave held its own unique formations and surprises, waiting to be discovered. Mallorca's caves were particularly special to Xisco. He knew there were still many unexplored areas waiting to be explored. Being a cave diver allowed him to combine his love for adventure with his passion for geology. He would often spend hours underwater, carefully documenting and studying the cave's features. In the 1950s, many European tourists started coming to Mallorca for its beautiful white sand beaches, sunny weather, and luxurious resorts. Mallorca is also famous for having over 200 cave systems. A complete vacation experience on the island often includes visiting at least one of these caves. Most tourists prefer to visit show caves, which are caves made accessible with lights, railings, walkways, and sometimes shops selling souvenirs. These caves provide a safe and easy way for people to see Mallorca's underground wonders. However, for those who crave adventure, Mallorca also has many natural caves without these amenities. It's important to know that only a few of Mallorca's caves are easy to get to. Many are in rough areas with steep cliffs and tough terrain. Exploring these caves is difficult unless you have the right gear and know where to find them. Mallorca's caves, some have impressive formations like stalactites and stalagmites formed over a long time. Others might have underground lakes or unique rock structures. Each cave tells a story about Mallorca's history and natural beauty. For adventurers like Xisco, who loved exploring caves, Mallorca's underground was a paradise. Whether diving into clear waters or hiking through hidden passages, Mallorca's caves offered endless chances to discover new things. After checking their supplies and making sure they had everything they needed, Xisco and Guillem walked to the entrance of Sapiketa Cave. Xisco knew this cave system well. Back in 2006, he had discovered connections between Sapiketa and 2 other nearby caves. On this day, their plan was to dive nearly a kilometer from the cave entrance to measure and map some of the tunnels and chambers they had found. Like many caves, Sapiketa had both dry areas and sections filled with water. To start their exploration, they squeezed through the relatively small opening of the cave. Inside, they first walked through the dry sections until they reached the water. There, they double-checked their gear, secured their air tanks, and then quietly slipped into the water, disappearing beneath the surface to begin their dive. The two men started swimming towards the first section of the cave. Ahead of them, the conditions were nearly perfect. Zisco and Guillem moved slowly and methodically. As they moved further from the entrance, it grew darker, but their flashlights lit up the crystal-clear water ahead and illuminate the cave walls, revealing stunning formations that had never been seen before. Every corner held a mystery, and Zisco savored every moment of exploration. So far, the dive seemed like many others they had done before. It would take them about an hour to reach their target section, which was 900 meters from where they entered the cave. They planned to spend another hour exploring the area before spending another hour returning to the starting point. Both open water and cave divers need to be careful about how much air they have. They have to estimate how long the dive will last so they can bring enough air tanks with them. The divers were well aware of this and made sure to bring enough air tanks for the entire trip, plus an extra hour in case of emergencies. One of the biggest dangers in cave diving is how quickly visibility can change. In an instant, the clear water can turn murky if divers accidentally disturb the fine sediment that coats the walls, floors, and ceilings of caves. Open water divers can move freely with their flutter kicks, but cave divers must use different techniques to propel themselves. These techniques minimize disturbing the water and sediment. However, it's normal for some sediment to get stirred up during dives. The real danger comes when divers accidentally touch the walls or ceiling, which can cause a cloud of sediment to obscure visibility. Imagine driving in dense fog at night with your car's high beams on. This gives you an idea of what it's like to be silted out underwater. The light only seems to illuminate the fog and makes it appear thicker. Underwater, in a confined space like a cave with limited air supply, losing visibility like this can quickly lead to a dangerous situation. For cave divers, maintaining clear visibility is crucial for navigating safely and avoiding accidents. They rely on their training and experience to handle these challenges and ensure they can safely explore and return from their underwater journeys. When visibility is poor, divers rely heavily on guide ropes. Popular caves for divers usually have fixed ropes running from the entrance throughout the various passages and chambers. If a cave doesn't have one already, divers will lay their own rope as they progress inside. These ropes are typically thin nylon with plastic markers that indicate important points or show the correct path at intersections. Most importantly, the rope is always tied to the cave entrance, and markers indicate which direction leads back outside. In silted-out conditions, when visibility is severely reduced and divers can easily lose their sense of direction, the guide rope becomes crucial. By holding onto the rope, divers can navigate back to safety regardless of how clear or murky the water is. After swimming for about an hour, the two men reached their destination within the cave. Zisco began collecting rock samples while Guillem measured the dimensions of a nearby chamber. They used their allotted time exploring the area before Zisco checked his dive computer. It showed that he had used up about a third of his air supply. Knowing Guillem's air consumption was likely similar, Zisco estimated they had enough air left for about 2 more hours, maybe 2.5 at most, to avoid needing to use their emergency tanks. They needed to finish up their tasks and start heading back soon to ensure they had enough air for a safe return journey. Eventually, Zisco met Guillem at a fork in the tunnel nearby. He pointed to his air gauge, signaling it was time to head back. Guillem gave him a thumbs up, and they started swimming towards the exit. Initially, the tunnel was wide, but as they moved forward, the walls become narrow, and the rocks seemed to get closer. It became clear that the conditions they had enjoyed on the way down had changed. Despite being careful not to disturb the sediment, their presence alone had stirred up enough to completely obscure their route back. This situation wasn't new for experienced divers like them. They knew exactly what to do. Find the guide rope. Grabbing onto it, they started moving through the silt, hand over hand. As the tunnel narrowed, Zisco's tanks occasionally snagged on the rock walls, stirring up more sediment and reducing visibility to almost zero. However, as long as they held onto the guide rope, they knew they would be safe. As they continued swimming through the tunnel towards the surface, suddenly, Zisco found himself holding the frayed end of the guide rope in his hand. To their horror, somehow it had broken or been cut. One of the most dangerous things for divers underwater is a panicked diver. A diver who panics can endanger everyone around them. Panicked movements stir up sediment, worsen visibility, and can lead to equipment issues like knocking out regulators or losing masks. Calm divers, like Zisco and Guillem, were keeping their composure, at least for the moment. Zisco briefly felt around, hoping to find the other end of the guideline. When he failed to find the guideline, he pulled out a laminated map of the cave. Despite the poor visibility, he could just make out Guillem and the map. He pointed to a nearby tunnel he believed led to one of Sapikeda's dry chambers. These chambers often have pockets of breathable air. If Guillem could find it, he could surface there and conserve the remaining air in his tanks. Meanwhile, Zisco decided to stay behind to search for another route out, or the guideline. Guillem turned towards the tunnel Zisco had pointed to and quickly disappeared into the silt. Luckily, after a short swim, Guillem found the chamber and surfaced. True to Zisco's belief, the chamber had a large air pocket. Meanwhile, Zisco continued to feel around in the silt, searching blindly for the section of the guide rope that was attached to the cave entrance. In his efforts to find it, he lost track of time completely. When Zisco finally checked his air gauge, he was shocked. An entire hour had passed while he searched, and the physical exertion had caused him to use up much more air than he had planned. His emergency air supply wouldn't last another hour, and they were still nearly a kilometer away from the exit. Even if he found the rope right then, they wouldn't have enough air to make it to the surface. Zisco realized they were now in serious trouble. He headed towards the air pocket where Guillem was waiting. When he surfaced and delivered the news, Guillem's heart sank. They were stuck in an unmapped chamber deep within an underwater maze. Their only hope now was to find a way out on their own. They got out of the water, and Zisco pulled out the map. He knew another exit from the cave, but it was far from where they entered. The conditions there were likely clear and the guideline intact, but their air tanks were already too low. Zisco realized only one of them could escape now that his emergency air was gone. Zisco decided Guillem would take all the remaining air, swim the longer route to the surface, and seek help. Guillem was stronger and more used to breathing air deep in caves than Zisco. Solo cave diving is risky, needing extra supplies and pushing equipment limits. If Guillem didn't return, Zisco's chances were slim alone in the chamber. Guillem prepared to swim up, and Zisco watched him go. They didn't make a fuss over parting, but Zisco worried if they'd meet again. Alone now, Zisco focused on survival. With limited supplies, no food, and failing flashlights, darkness loomed ahead. Luckily, the chamber wasn't completely unfriendly. It was 80 meters long and 20 meters wide, with a ceiling 12 meters high above the water. This gave it plenty of space, making the air pocket quite large. Zisco found a flat rock where he could lie down comfortably. He also discovered a source of fresh water. Most underwater cave systems are filled with salty water, but here, an unknown source was supplying fresh water into the lake. By skimming the surface with his hands, Zisco could drink as much water as he needed. However, the air inside the chamber was still a concern. The air we normally breathe contains less than 0.5% of carbon dioxide. Inside caves, though, carbon dioxide levels can be much higher. In fact, carbon dioxide plays a crucial role in forming caves, creating the spaces and mineral formations that Zisco loved to explore. It's the reason why there was an air pocket to sustain him. However, high levels of carbon dioxide can be dangerous for humans. Okay, in caves, the carbon dioxide levels are often much higher than outside. The deeper into the cave, the higher the concentration gets. Air with around 2% carbon dioxide causes slight cognitive and motor function decline. At 3%, it can be deadly. Inside the chamber, Zisco was breathing air with 5% carbon dioxide, putting him at risk of carbon dioxide poisoning. Shortly after Guillem left, Zisco noticed his breathing becoming labored, a sign of early carbon dioxide poisoning. Mild poisoning causes drowsiness, headaches, and dizziness. Severe cases lead to hallucinations, panic attacks, organ failure, and death. Zisco lay down on the chamber's only flat, dry spot to slow carbon dioxide buildup in his blood. He tried to hold his breath longer between slow inhales and moved only to drink water or use the restroom. He kept his flashlight off to conserve battery, using it sparingly to check the time. Despite feeling symptoms, Zisco stayed hopeful during his solitary hours. Time seemed distorted, making seconds feel like hours. Thinking several hours had passed, he checked his watch and realized only 3 hours had gone by. Soon after, his watch died, leaving him without even a sense of time passing. Exhausted and suffering from a pounding headache due to rising carbon dioxide levels, Zisco couldn't find sleep. he grew increasingly anxious, convinced Guillem hadn't survived his journey for help. He resigned himself to the chamber, becoming his final resting place. Meanwhile, Guillem surfaced near where they entered the cave, gasping for fresh air. Rushing to their car, he called Mallorca's caving organization, Group Nord, for help. An hour later, top cave divers were gearing up at the cave's entrance. Bernat Clammer, a close friend with extensive cave diving experience, led the rescue attempt. With Xisco's map marked with an X indicating the chamber, they entered the cave. 2 hours later, Bernat returned with news that both the original and alternative routes were blocked by silt stirred up by Guillem's hurried return. With poor visibility, the divers couldn't proceed further. Like Xisco, they now had to wait for the silt to settle, a process that could take hours or even days. Inside the chamber, Xisco's headache became more intense, and breathing became harder. Unable to sleep or move much, he stared into the darkness, thinking about his family. He worried about his mother, his young children, and his sister-in-law battling cancer. He wondered if his ex-wife knew where he was and if his kids were worried about him. Suddenly, light broke through the darkness, followed by bubbles like those of a diver surfacing. Dizzy with hope, he turned on his flashlight, expecting rescuers. But there was nothing. No bubbles, no light, no divers. Xisco realized he was hallucinating, a sign of severe carbon dioxide poisoning. Disappointed, he laid back down on the rock, facing the harsh reality of his situation. A while later, Xisco heard what sounded like drilling into the rock above him. He thought it was another hallucination, but the noise continued. Unbeknownst to him, rescuers above were trying to reach him, but poor visibility delayed their efforts. They attempted to drill a hole to pass food and water through, raising Xisco's hopes that Guillem had made it out and help was coming. However, the drilling abruptly stopped, and hope faded. Rescuers couldn't penetrate the rock, leaving Xisco feeling desperate and helpless. Above ground, at the entrance to Sapaketa, activity buzzed with divers planning and authorities managing the scene. Medics were on standby, ready to assist Xisco once he was out. By 9:30 p.m. on Sunday, Xisco had been trapped for over 30 hours. The civil guard, overseeing the rescue, decided to wait until morning due to silt settling and poor visibility. Some divers disagreed, fearing it might be too late by then. Meanwhile, hallucinations and sleep deprivation tormented Xisco, clouding his thoughts and raising doubts about his chances of survival. Suddenly, Xisco remembered a pocket knife in his dive gear across the chamber. With his flickering flashlight, he swam over, found the knife, and returned to his spot on the rock. It gave him a sense of control, though he hoped not to use it. By late Monday morning, divers resumed the rescue attempt. Progress was slow due to silt, but they followed the guide rope carefully. After 2 hours, they reported they were close to Xisco's chamber with clear enough visibility for the next team. Bernat Clammer, an old friend, quickly geared up upon hearing this. Underwater, he followed the guide rope straight to the chamber. Inside, Xisco, struggling with hypercapnia and sleeplessness, heard bubbles again, ignoring them as hallucinations. As Bernat pulled out his friend out of water, he feared finding Xisco dead. Despite his doubts, he called out. Xisco, while hallucinations that never called his name before sat up in anticipation. When he saw Bernat approaching, he jumped up and hugged him tightly, partly out of excitement and partly to ensure he was real. After reassuring Xisco, Bernat informed him that Guillem was safe on the surface. Although Bernat couldn't bring Xisco out immediately, he gave him glucose gel for energy and assessed his condition. Once assured Xisco was mentally ready, Bernat left to update the rescue team. 4 hours later, the next team arrived with fresh air tanks. They brought nitrox, a special mix that helped Xisco breathe easier. Finally, breathing deeply, Xisco's headaches eased and he felt clearer. Eager to leave, he signaled he was ready. At 11:10 p.m. on Monday, after 60 hours trapped, Xisco walked out of Sapaketa under his own strength, finally safe. The crowd cheered loudly, and as promised, Guillem stood waiting for Xisco. They meet each other, but Xisco urgently needed medical treatment. Despite seeming okay, he was taken away in an ambulance. Besides high carbon dioxide levels, his body temperature had dropped dangerously low to 90 Fahrenheit, risking hypothermia. Miraculously, after a night in the hospital and breathing pure oxygen, Xisco recovered enough to go home the next day. Watching the TV coverage of his rescue, Xisco broke into tears, overwhelmed with gratitude for the 60 rescuers who worked tirelessly to save him. Despite this harrowing experience, he never considered giving up cave diving, Just a month later, he returned to Sapaketa and visited the chamber where he had been trapped for nearly 3 days. His subsequent dives haven't been without incident, though. In 2022, he found himself in another challenging situation in a different cave system on Mallorca. During that incident, one diver got separated from the group in silted-out conditions, but was found safe in a chamber with an air pocket after 7 hours. Reflecting on his experiences, Zisco humorously asked rescuers what took them so long this time. As a tradition in Group Nord, the first diver to explore a new cave or section names it, although Guillaume saw the chamber first, but Zisco was given the honor of naming it. He named it the Room of Three Miracles, in recognition of surviving against incredible odds, finding breathable air, enduring toxic conditions for so long, and ultimately escaping with his life. The journey back was grueling, a testament to the unwavering determination of both Zisco and the rescue team. Each tight passage, each moment of exhaustion, was met with renewed focus on the light waiting for them at the end. Finally, after 84 hours trapped underground, Zisco emerged from the cave entrance, greeted by cheers, tears, and the warmth of the sun. It was an emotional reunion, a victory not just for Zisco, but for the power of human teamwork and the unwavering spirit of survival. The Sapaketa cave incident captured the world's attention. It highlighted the dangers of cave diving, but also the incredible bravery of cave rescuers. Zisco's ordeal left him forever changed, but he also emerged with a profound appreciation for life and the power of human connection in the face of extreme adversity. If you enjoyed this story of courage and survival, be sure to leave a comment below and let us know what other cave diving adventures you'd like to see.
Pridhamsley Cave is supposed to be an easy beginner cave. Now, even though it's not a commercial show cave, professional splunkers often lead groups of new cavers and even class trips through Pridhamsley's dark, twisting corridors. But one day, in 2006, the cave nearly claimed the life of a fledgling caver named Emily when she fell onto the cold, hard stone. Emily vowed to join the team that saved her. But 5 years later, she mysteriously lost her grip again. This time, rescuers weren't sure if she could make it out alive. To uncover the mystery behind Emily's double rescue story, we have to travel to England's southwestern county of Devon. The countryside of Devon is filled with rolling hills and steep cliffs that form deep limestone passages as waves crash against jagged coasts. Port towns climb up the mountainsides, and boats fill the harbors. Devon's unique land makes it the perfect place for caves to form, and some of these caves contain human remains that are over 30,000 years old. Pridhamsley Cave is just one of many in the area, but it's popular with beginners from all across England. People from urban London can reach the cave by a 2-hour train ride, followed by another half-hour drive, and then a 15-minute walk from the road. The cave is difficult to survey not because it's hard to explore, but because it has many twisting and interconnected layers. Surveys end up looking like illegible messes as splunkers try to draw the overlapping pathways. There's only one updated map available at a nearby library, so new cavers can't research their routes before traveling to the area. Cavers descending into Pridhamsley rely on guides who know the passages, blissfully unaware of the deadly traps awaiting them below. Outdoor groups like Somerset Adventures will take new cavers on paid tours through the caverns, but make no mistake, Pridhamsley Cave is the real deal. It might be easy enough to reliably take newbies through it, but it does require serious caving gear, and the cave will present difficult maneuvers for those not yet baptized by the muddy waters below ground. Back in 2006, a determined caver named Emily set foot into Pridhamsley with a few others. She was only 19 at the time and excited to explore real caving. Their group ducked under the mossy ceiling of rock that hung above the cave entrance. Once inside, they looked around, expecting to walk into a large room. But the guide pointed out that the entrance to the rest of the cave was a small hole in the rock wall near the ground. Some members were already having second thoughts as they squeezed through the narrow opening. Their guides did their best to reassure them that the cave would open up and encourage them to see it through. Shortly after crawling through the entrance to Pridhamsley, the tour met a wall of rock that was nearly vertical. The guide asked the new cavers if they wanted to try climbing this 23-foot wall, without ropes. trips into Pridhamsley often forego ropes and harnesses. Now, these safety measures might not be necessary for experienced cavers, but even other, easier caves will use ropes for added safety, especially for beginners. Sometimes people freeze on the rocks, not from cold, but from fear. They become paralyzed on the wall when the only way is down. Adding to the immediate horror, the guide informed them that the wall had only a few holds that almost required shorter cavers to jump to reach them. One member attempted the climb, struggled, and shook with fear as his unconditioned hands struggled to grip the smooth limestone. He made it to the top, but his legs were shaky and he was out of breath. An uncomfortable silence hung in the air before the guide laughed and told them there were easier routes. Emily felt upstaged by her fellow caver, but she kept her pride in check, and she listened as the guide pointed out different routes they could take. Along the way, they saw the Little Man rock formation, and they remarked on how cute it looked, not realizing that its human-like form was a dark omen, with its head and feet anchored to the cave ceiling and walls, trapped in place. The team progressed, as walls both sharp and smooth bit down on cavers, snagging clothes and getting some members briefly stuck. The next section along their route was a 50-foot squeeze that forced the adults to contort their shoulders. They slowly wormed through the squeeze, pressing one arm against their bodies, pulling it down toward their waist, while bringing their other shoulder up to their ears to reduce the width of their shoulders. This advanced technique made them just narrow enough to make it through. If anyone panicked or changed the position of their arms, they could be trapped. There's not enough space to move your arms or even crawl forward. Following this section, the cave opens up to the changing room. To progress to the deeper portions of the cave called Prid 2, cavers have to switch to diving gear. This area diverges into 3 different pathways: the underwater cellar, the mud escalator, and the coal chute. While ropes are discouraged in the earlier portion of the cave, this region does have a rope that extends into the water to guide divers. The sumps in Pridhamsley are short, and many cavers choose to free dive without the use of oxygen tanks. Divers only need to hold their breath for a few seconds on the first sump, and then roughly 30 seconds on the second. Now, even though that's easy to do under normal circumstances, these short passages could easily be deadly for newbies. Divers following the rope might notice other underwater passages, so inexperienced or ambitious divers could easily get lost. At around 80 feet down, the lake twists up into the largest chamber in the cave, dubbed Jerry's Chamber. The lake in Jerry's Chamber is home to eerie white cave shrimps, but this area is a dead end. Cavers who venture here have to swim out through the same opening and risk drowning as they search for the guiding rope, followed by another 80-foot swim for air. There are other ways out, but they're also risky. Another exit forces people to wade into the water and duck below a rocky outcropping. The next section is almost entirely submerged, with barely enough room between the water and the ceiling to keep your mouth out of the water. It was near the changing room that things went wrong for Emily. The last exit is through the mud escalator, a 16-foot tall ramp that's covered in mud. Just like the entrance, this area has few holds. Emily chose this section and began climbing up the thick sludge on the cave wall. She didn't get far. This section was around 300 feet into the cave. She tried to go up the steep, muddied wall, but just a few feet off the ground, she slipped. She didn't even know what happened, but the next thing she remembered, she was on her back. Then came the pain. She had slipped and fallen straight onto her back. Emily lay on her back, writhing in pain. They weren't sure what happened, but she was weak and her limbs started to occasionally spasm. She was still conscious and the movement wasn't too strong, but there was signs of serious injury. One of the guides charged through the exit and immediately called the Devon Cave Rescue Organization. As part of the British Cave Rescue Council, the DCRO has a special off-road ambulance, a management vehicle, and access to an extended Coast Guard rescue helicopter. This full volunteer service group has been around since 1965. They're fast and professional, and they dispatch their teams straight away. Inside the cave, Emily groaned in pain. The spine sends signals from the brain to the limbs, and spasms could mean that the delicate nerves were slashed or punctured. Any wrong move could sever her spinal cord, leaving her paralyzed. So far, she wasn't numb, but instead, damaging her central nervous system had set her whole body on fire with pain. Within the first hour, rescuers arrived, bringing a flexible stretcher that could fit in Pridhamsley's tight tunnels. Teams were equipped with underground radios to communicate, and the rescuers anchored wire ladders near the exit for better handholds while they climbed out with the stretcher connected to their harnesses. Emily still had feeling and movement in her limbs, which meant she was probably going to make it out just fine. It took teams 3 hours to pry her from the cave. Based on reports of her potential spinal injury, the team brought the airlift, loaded her into the helicopter, and took her to safety. Doctors thought her strange twitching after the fall was the result of trauma to nerves and possibly psychological shock. She had a bruised spine and some fractures, but nothing too serious. Emily wasn't crushed by her rescue. Instead, she turned her frightening experience into ambition. After she recovered, she joined the Devon Cave Rescue Organization and became their secretary. But rescuers and her fellow cavers were puzzled by what had happened. She wasn't that far up the mud escalator, and she didn't have any signs of fatigue. Plus, the way she fell didn't look like a slip. Then there was the strange reaction that happened when she landed. Within a few years' time, the answer behind Emily's mysterious fall would be revealed when Emily had her second cave rescue, and this one was much worse. In 2011, Emily was exploring an abandoned mining tunnel connected near England's caves when something went wrong again. Her hands failed to grip a wire ladder, much like the one used to save her before. Her vision went dark, and she fell onto her back again. This time, though, she was more advanced. She was with a small team of cavers, and there was no expert guide. Her friends rushed to her, but this wasn't a simple injury like before. She was immediately in a life and death situation. This time, she lost consciousness. Over the next few hours, she came back to consciousness, only to pass out again as the cycle kept repeating. Prior to this trip, she had revealed the secret of her accident in Pridhamsley Cave. Emily suffered from epilepsy. Both cave rescues were caused by epileptic seizures. Epilepsy is a condition where the brain produces abnormal signals that lead to seizures. In Pridhamsley, Emily might have had an atonic seizure, otherwise known as a drop seizure, which caused her muscles to stop working in the middle of her climb. But now, her brain signals were completely haywire. She might have been experiencing a tonic-clonic or a grand mal seizure, the most extreme side effect of epilepsy. People experiencing grand mal seizures might go stiff or shake uncontrollably, and in rare cases, these catastrophic events can prevent patients from breathing, or even instantly stop their heart from beating. Her friends and fellow cavers tried to stay by her side as she convulsed on the cave floor. 2 members of the party climbed out of the cave, but it was a slow process. It took them around an hour to reach the surface where they could call for emergency rescue services. They informed rescuers that Emily was mostly unresponsive, slipping in and out of consciousness, that she had fallen on her back just a few years prior in Pridhamsley, and that they were in a vertical cave that went deep into the earth. This time, over 50 rescuers rushed to the wilderness. This wasn't a simple in-and-out cave rescue. This was a matter of life and death. Every second counted, and crews had to improvise a plan. The first rescuers to arrive were volunteer cavers and climbers. They could easily traverse the cave and reach her to assess her condition. Rescuers rappelled down the vertical cave walls, blasted apart by mining machines. The rescuers reached her and started checking her vitals. In her fleeting moments of lucidity, they asked Emily about what she was experiencing or if she had any prior conditions. But, fearing she might be removed from her position with the Devon rescue team, she tried to cover up her own condition. The rescuers who arrived knew something was wrong. If this wasn't a prior condition, Well, then Emily might have sustained serious nerve damage to cause this type of reaction. They all began to slowly realize another terrible detail. This underground tunnel had been a lead mine. Lead is a heavy radioactive metal. Exposure to low-grade radiation for brief intervals can be safe. That's why the cavers were here in the first place. If the team had completed their cave trip, then they wouldn't need to worry. But this rescue could easily take 4 times longer than they were supposed to be down here. Each second that goes by could increase their risk of permanent injury and cancer. To make matters worse, the area could expel toxic fumes, or dust from the mines could get picked up as they drill holes for ropes and pulleys. Lead dust is far more dangerous than low-level background radiation. Lead particles can enter the lungs, where they can sit permanently, lodging themselves into delicate tissues or even finding their way into the bloodstream through the alveoli. Once inside the body, lead dust continues to release low-grade radiation. But without a means of escape, this means those exposed are all but guaranteed to get cancer or other life-ending conditions. The rescuers called for better medical backup, and they called the Hazardous Area Response Team, who were trained in dealing with dangerous environments like the lead mines. Rescuers also brought mining engineers who could navigate the mining tunnels that intersect with caves. These technicians also had knowledge on how to create microblasts to dislodge trapped cavers. Paramedics brought anesthesia to numb her pain, but if her nerve damage was too severe, they might not be able to use it, since it would increase the risk her lungs might fail. The first paramedic arrived and deduced that she did have another spinal injury. This time, her pelvis had also been damaged from the fall. As hours passed by, she and her friends realized they had to come clean. Luckily, Emily's group of cavers knew about her condition and gave her medication to block signals in her brain or change the flow of ions to reduce her brain's signal noise and lower the effects of her seizure. They administered the medicine just before the rescuers arrived. If this step hadn't been completed, it's likely that the combination of spinal injury plus the misfiring neurons would have been the death of Emily. Her friends had to risk their own safety to save her. To give her the medicine, they had to get near her mouth, but one wrong move could cause her to bite through her own tongue. She could choke on her tongue or bleed out from severed nerves, or she could involuntarily bite their fingers off. The above-ground part rescue team had a new problem. The cave's entrance was a huge vertical shaft that had to be climbed down. There was no way for them to affix normal pulleys onto the rock with no ceiling above them. Instead, the team used a tripod rope system with a winch to hoist her up a 300-foot cliff and out of the cave. The paramedic attending her wasn't skilled in vertical caving, so they had to be hoisted up the mine shaft with her. They began the slow journey upward as the winch creaked and groaned as dozens of onlookers leaned over the edge with headlamps and bated breath. It took 30 minutes to slowly raise them up the 300-foot hole. They had to check for any problems with their equipment and maintain a close eye on Emily's condition. The rescuers heard she had survived a fall once before, and her friends told them that she had joined a different group, becoming a volunteer rescuer like them. This news sparked a fire inside them, and they all pulled together to work harder than ever. Eventually, Emily was hoisted above the hole into the ghost town above. The whole rescue operation took 6 hours, double Emily's previous rescue, but much faster than the rescuers had anticipated. All in all, Emily spent 9 hours being rescued over the years. She played with fire by not talking about her condition, but sufferers of chronic medical conditions can often be stigmatized. She did her best to live a full life, and she didn't let her injuries or her epilepsy hold her back. She kept on caving and fighting to rescue others just as they rescued her. Thanks for watching. Emily kept striving when many people would have given up. What keeps you motivated to achieve your goals? Let us know in the comments section below.
Imagine being trapped hundreds of feet below the ground, surrounded by darkness and the roar of rushing water. All hope seems lost. This wasn't a scene from a movie. but the terrifying reality for 9 miners trapped in a collapsed Quecreek mine. For 77 harrowing hours, they fought for survival with limited air and dwindling supplies. Above ground, a massive rescue operation unfolded, a race against time to save their lives. This is the incredible true story of the Quecreek mine rescue, a story that will have you on the edge of your seat. We'll dive deep into the drama, the bravery of the trapped miners, and the relentless efforts of the rescue teams. This isn't just a story about survival. It's a testament to the human spirit, the power of community, and the unwavering courage it takes to face the unthinkable. So, buckle up and get ready for a thrilling journey. You won't want to miss this. On July 24th at the Quecreek mine in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, owned by Black Wolf Coal Company, 18 coal miners accidentally broke into the abandoned Saxman Coal Harrison No. 2 mine. This mine wasn't well documented. The accident flooded the room and pillar mine with around 75 million US gallons of water. Both the Saxman mine and Quecreek mine are part of the Upper Katanning coal seam. The Upper Katanning seam is typically 38 to 62 inches thick and slopes about 1.7 to 2.3 degrees to the northwest. The flooded mine void of the Saxman mine was higher up than the active Quecreek mine because of the area's geological structure. The Saxman mine was positioned along the Boswell Dome anticline axis, while the Quecreek mine was on the western side of the anticline. Originally opened as Quecreek No. 2 mine in 1913 by Quemahoning Creek Coal Company, it was later bought by Saxman Coal and Coke Company in 1925. The mine operated until 1963, with a break from 1934 to 1941. It went by various names, including Saxman, Harrison, and most recently, Harrison No. 2. The miners were working in the one left panel on July 24th, which extended about 3,100 feet from the main shaft. The flooded abandoned mine was just up dip of the Quecreek No. 1 mine permit boundary in the Upper Katanning coal seam. At around 9 p.m. on Wednesday, July 24th, 18 miners found themselves in grave danger, trapped 240 feet underground beneath Dormal Farm. The Saxman mine, where they were working, unexpectedly flooded as they mined further eastward. Water burst through the walls, flooding their entry point. Quick thinking, the 9 miners in one area used the mine's phone system to alert their colleagues in another section to evacuate immediately. Fortunately, the second group managed to escape around 9:45 p.m. They wasted no time in alerting others and making a 911 call at 9:53 p.m. Unfortunately, the water was rising too rapidly for the first group of miners to make it out. Twice, they attempted to navigate through the narrow, 4-foot-high tunnels, spanning over 3,000 feet to a shaft that could lead them to safety. However, these passages were also flooded. On the surface, Pennsylvania State Police were quick to respond. By 10:30 p.m., they were already guarding the Quecreek mine site and directing reporters to a nearby church for a scheduled press conference later that night. State Police Corporal Robert Barnes Jr. wasted no time in reaching out to the families of the missing miners, asking them to gather at the Sipesville firehouse for updates. As the night wore on, the situation became increasingly dire. By 11 p.m., Barnes sought assistance from the local United Methodist pastor Barry Rittenauer, asking if he could spend the night at the firehouse with the families for support. Amidst the chaos, efforts were underway to find a drill capable of boring a hole large enough to rescue the trapped miners. Eventually, one was located in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and plans were put in motion to bring it to the site. As the morning of Thursday, July 25th dawned, the water levels inside the mine continued to rise steadily. By 9:15 a.m., water was already spilling out of the portals, signaling the urgency of the situation. With the Quecreek mine portals almost underwater, rescue efforts began right away. Pumping out water from the mine and nearby wells started first. The focus was on getting fresh air to the trapped miners. Bob Long, an engineer technician, helped by making GPS measurements. At 2:05 a.m., they started drilling a 6.5-inch hole to pump air into the mine shaft where the miners were thought to be. A team of 4 began drilling at 3:15 a.m. on Thursday. They drilled through 240 feet of rock and reached the mine shaft an hour and 45 minutes later. By 5:06 a.m. on July 25th, the hole was drilled into the mine. Air was pumped in and the air quality was checked. It showed 19.3% oxygen. Rescue workers tapped on the air pipe, and at 5:12 a.m., they got a response of 3 strong bangs. Later, at 11:40 a.m., there were 9 taps. As the drilling rig pumped compressed air into the mine, oxygen levels rose rapidly. However, monitors showed that the water level was raising dangerously close to 1,825 feet above sea level. Rescuers worried that the area where the miners were hiding would soon be submerged. Mine ventilation expert John Eurosek from the U.S. Mine Safety and Health Administration, MSHA, suggested creating a pressurized air pocket for the miners. Although this plan had never been tried in the United States, calculations were done and the hole was sealed around the air supply. The drill operator then used the rig's air compressor to pump air into the mine at a rate of 920 cubic feet per minute. The air temperature reached 197 degrees Fahrenheit at a pressure of 90 pounds per square inch. The noise from the rushing air was deafening and painful for the miners, but it gave them hope, knowing that rescuers were aware of their location. While rescue efforts were underway, another critical task was to remove water from the Quecreek mine. This was essential to lower the water level and prevent the air pocket where the miners were gathered from being lost. If a rescue hole breached the mine, the air pocket could escape, causing the area to flood and the miners to drown. Another concern was the air quality inside the mine. Pumps were urgently needed to drain the flooded mine. As pumps became available, they were immediately installed in the pit. The first diesel pump arrived at 8:33 a.m. on Thursday. Before its arrival, only 2 submersible pumps were operating in the pit. By 11:05 a.m., the water in the pit had risen to 4 to 5 feet deep. At its peak, the water level reached 1,856.8 feet at around 4 p.m. on Thursday, July 25th. High-capacity diesel pumps were set up in the pit and began operating in the afternoon. By 4 to 6 p.m., there was a reported 6-inch drop in the water level. The pumping rate varied as new pumps arrived and adjustments were made. At its peak, the pumps were removing approximately 27,000 gallons per minute from the mine pit. Meanwhile, additional borehole locations were surveyed on the surface for drilling into the lowest areas of the mine. Extra holes were drilled to speed up the dewatering process. Below ground, the rising water covered the air shaft, making it impossible for the miners to tap on the pipe. Instead, they used a hammer to bang on the rock ceiling, which could be detected by seismic equipment brought in by federal mining officials. By noon on Thursday, the miners had to retreat to higher ground, about 300 feet from the air shaft. With the water closing in, miner Randy Fogel estimated they had about an hour left to live. They wrote notes, said prayers, and prepared to face their fate together. However, as the dewatering efforts continued, they noticed the water had stopped rising. Adapting to survival mode, the soaked miners conserved resources and huddled together to fight off hypothermia in the chilly 50-degree Fahrenheit environment. Crew Chief Fogel remained optimistic, encouraging the group and believing in their eventual rescue. Amidst the ordeal, Dennis Hall's lunch pail was found floating, containing a still dry corned beef sandwich made by his wife and a bottle of Pepsi. Thomas Foy discovered 2 Mountain Dews on one of the machines. As they waited, they could hear the drilling drawing nearer, but at 1:50 a.m. on Friday, it abruptly stopped. A large drill, capable of making a 30-inch hole, was brought from West Virginia under police escort. Oxygen purging started, and the drilling of rescue hole number 1 began at 6:45 p.m. on Thursday, July 25th. The goal was to reach the area where the miners were believed to be. By 1:12 a.m. on Friday, July 26th, the drill had reached a depth of 105 feet, but then the drill bit broke. A piece of the bit got stuck in the hole, making it difficult to retrieve. A special tool was needed to get the broken piece out. Typically, making such a tool would take 3 or 4 days, but a machine shop in Big Run, Jefferson County, managed to build it in about 3 hours. A National Guard helicopter delivered the tool, and the broken bit was finally removed from rescue hole number 1 at 4:09 p.m. on July 26th. The drilling equipment broke down, halting progress at the borehole for about 18 hours. The miners were worried, but Foley, one of the miners, tried to reassure them, saying that soon drilling will begin again. On the afternoon of the 25th, the miners' relatives were brought to the mine and briefed about the rescue efforts. Governor Mark Schweiker visited the site that night and expressed concern, saying they might need divine help. He assured that all necessary resources were being deployed for the rescue operation, and anything less than saving all 9 men would be unacceptable. People from all over the world reached out with calls, emails, and prayers to support the rescue effort. The news media covered the story with hope, with many journalists returning to Somerset hotels they stayed in during the United Airlines Flight 93 crash coverage just 10 miles away. A new 30-inch drill bit arrived from West Virginia at 7 p.m. on Friday, but because it was slightly larger, the hole needed to be widened from the surface. This process started around 8:40 p.m. on Friday. Enlarging the hole with the new bit began at 1 a.m. on July 27th, but stopped later to replace a part. At 2:30 p.m., drilling halted again as the operation damaged some parts, requiring a new assembly. At 3:30 a.m., it was decided to switch to a 26-inch bit, available 7 miles south of the mine, which could fit the rescue capsule. By 6:30 a.m., the new bit was installed and drilling resumed. There was concern about breaking into the chamber too quickly, causing water to rush in and drown the miners. Another worry was decompression sickness, as the miners were breathing air at higher pressure than the surface due to the surrounding water pressure. To prepare for these risks, an airlock was made for the escape shaft, and portable hyperbaric chambers arrived at the site. Drilling paused at 1:38 p.m. on July 27th to install the airlock and wait for the water level to decrease. Drilling resumed at 4:45 p.m., but at 8:11 p.m. there was a problem with the airlock rings, which needed fixing. Repairs were done by 8:58 p.m. and drilling restarted. By 10 p.m., the water level had decreased to 1,827.92 MSL. The drill broke through into the mine at 10:16 p.m. at a depth of 239.6 feet, which was lower than the mine's entrance. A second escape hole was also being drilled just in case. By 7 a.m. on July 27th, it had reached a depth of 160 feet when drilling got tough. By 1:31 p.m., the drill lost its equipment at around 204 feet. Repairs were underway when the first hole broke through and drilling stopped. After the drill broke through, rescuers tapped on the steel with a hammer to signal the trapped miners, and they heard a faint response. The miners took turns walking down the passageway every 10 or 15 minutes to check where the sounds were coming from. On Saturday, around 10:15 p.m., Heilman and Foy found the drill opening, despite their dim cap lamps, and alerted the others. Once the hole was open, all equipment was turned off to measure the air pressure between the mine and surface atmospheres accurately. The pressure reading showed 0, meaning the pressures were equal and no airlock was needed. The compressor was shut down and the drill steels were removed from the hole. At 10:53 p.m., a special two-way communication device with a glow stick attached for visibility was lowered into the air pipe. Communication was established with the miners, who confirmed that all 9 were alive and well, except for the foreman who was experiencing chest pains. At 12:30 a.m. on July 28th, the 8.5 feet high steel mesh escape capsule, loaded with supplies, descended into rescue hole number 1, where the men had endured 77 hours of fear and hope. Due to ongoing chest pains, Foreman Randy Fogel was the first miner rescued and reached the surface around 1 a.m. The order of rescue for the rest of the crew was based on weight, with the heaviest miners coming up first and the lightest last, as they would need no assistance getting into the capsule. The miners were brought up every 15 minutes, and by 2:45 a.m., all 9 miners were safely on the surface. None of the miners suffered from decompression sickness, and they were transported to hospitals by helicopter or ambulance. However, during their final ascent, the miners were soaked by another rush of cold water as the drill shaft had passed through an aquifer. Their extremities appeared purple and mottled from being immersed, and trauma surgeon Dr. Russell Demir remarked, "They were freezing cold. It looked like if you rubbed real hard against their feet, you could rub the skin right off." The miners' body temperatures ranged from about 92.5 degree Fahrenheit to 96.8 degree Fahrenheit, compared to the normal body temperature of 98.6 degree Fahrenheit. The miners rescued in order were Randall Fogel, Harry Blaine Mayhew Jr., Thomas Tucker Foy, John Unger, John Filippi, Ron Heilman, Dennis J. Hall, Robert Pugh Jr., and Mark Poppernack. Each of them was brought to safety one by one, facing challenges and uncertainty during their ordeal. Randall Fogel was the most seriously affected of the 9 miners and complained of chest pains upon his rescue. He was also suffering through the rescue. Thankfully, all of them made it out alive and have since recovered. While some have continued working in the mining industry, others have chosen different paths. The U.S. Mine Safety and Health Administration conducted an investigation into the incident. They found that the main reason for the flooding was the use of an outdated and uncertified mine map of the Harrison No. 2 mine. This map did not accurately show the complete layout of the mine. As a result, the map used for the Quecreek No. 1 mine, required by MSHA, was also incorrect. The core problem was the lack of an updated certified mine map for the Harrison No. 2 mine in Pennsylvania's records. Governor Mark Schweiker established a committee to look into the matter further, especially focusing on the actions of the Black Wolf Coal Company, which had a history of 25 violations. The MSHA report highlighted the successful rescue of the trapped miners, attributing it to timely warnings and decisive actions. Fogel and Hall's quick response in notifying miners in the affected sections saved lives. The unity and teamwork of the One Left section crew, along with the miners' knowledge of escape procedures, were vital for survival. Company officials' prompt calls for assistance and the swift response of expert personnel were crucial in the rescue's success. A memorial park was established at Dormal Farms, commemorating the rescue operations site. It is located north of the Somerset County Historical Society on Pennsylvania Route 985. Several books recounting the event have been published, including one authored by the miners themselves. Today, the Quecreek mine rescue site stands as a symbol of hope and resilience. Hubbard's Cave in Colorado was home to one of the most bizarre cave rescues of all time. Two families pleaded for help after two adults disappeared without a trace. Law enforcement made the unprecedented move to block rescuers from entering Hubbard's Cave for days. Later, rescuers were allowed inside, and then a fight erupted after the rescue, which sparked another investigation. The families accused the police with failing to comply with procedures, and the investigators claimed the lost cavers staged their own disappearance. Did rescuers make it in time to save the two lost cavers? Which side was right? Join us as we uncover the mysteries of the Hubbard's Cave rescue. Hubbard's Cave was named after settler William Hubbard when he and his brother-in-law Griff Jones uncovered the cave during their journey for gold in 1892. Originally, they only found a pile of boulders, but as they broke them apart, the tumbling rubble revealed a cave entrance. Hubbard and Jones searched for a better entrance, and they found an opening they could easily explore without laboring against tons of rock. Inside, the pair found campfires left by native Ute tribes. The Ute have a tradition known as the Bear Dance, which is a 10-day celebration held in March. In the past, they raced horses, gambled, and ate before and after the main event. In reverence to the bears they hunted, the Ute people gathered to dance like a bear scratching a tree, while musicians played instruments called rasps or notched sticks that mimic the sound of claws on bark. Afterward, the designated storyteller would weave interesting and allegorical tales around the campfire. Hubbard and Jones even noted that there was evidence of bears living in the cave as well. The prospectors were enchanted by the cave. They kept walking deeper as each new step revealed new cave formations and crystals they had never seen before. Eventually, they realized they were lost. In their panic, they wound their way through the labyrinth of the cave, which only worsened their situation. They nearly resigned to their fate when their hunting dog trotted into their lamplight and led them back to the surface. Today, Hubbard's Cave is located on the edge of the Glenwood Canyon on a rolling, rocky hillside dotted with pine trees overlooking the Colorado River. Another entrance was later found, giving the cave 3 different paths, and Hubbard's houses one of the largest bat populations in Colorado. For over a century since its rediscovery, Hubbard's remained open to the public, and it was a popular attraction for cavers, hikers, and partiers. Back in 2003, 54-year-old John Hayter and 49-year-old Sherry DeCrow drove into the Colorado wilderness to start their expedition into the countryside. They stopped at a trailhead parking space and started again down a long trail meant for bicycles and ATVs, though some brave hikers choose to walk the whole 9-mile trail along this route just to reach the actual trail that leads to Hubbard's. The long trail leads to a secretive quarter-mile trail marked by an outdated and unkempt sign. The last stretch is steep and rocky, which makes the journey even more challenging. John and Sherry were fit, but the hike drained them more than they realized. Their fatigue would come back to bite them, limiting their mobility and strength in the cave and causing them to make poor choices that led to disaster. The main entrance to Hubbard's is a triangular hole in the streaked rock that protrudes from the ground. The floor of the entrance is lined with sharp, jagged stones that have splinted from the cliffside or the ceilings of the cave. The ceiling dips down to resemble a dark, gaping maw ready to devour all those who dare to enter. Sherry only planned to show John the way to Hubbard's Cave, but once they reached the cold and curious void in the rock, they threw caution to the wind and ventured into the darkness. Just like Hubbard and Jones before them, the ambitious pair entered the cave, oblivious to the dangers that lay in wait below them.
After their long trek, they had an easy start to the cave. Over the years, the government installed some steps, a metal tube, a support wall, and a ladder at the entrance because so many non-cavers ventured to the site. John and Sherry fit among those casual cavers who don't take splunking seriously. They brought flashlights instead of headlamps. They had no backup lights. They wore regular athletic hiking gear, and they had no food or water. On top of all these mistakes, they then started their journey by ignoring one of the most important steps for any cave adventure. They didn't tell anyone they were going into Hubbard's cave. Communicating the plan to others is a crucial step for anyone who wants to explore the deep tunnels below our feet. Once inside a cave, cell phones won't work. If you get stuck, injured, or lost, you're stuck relying on a chance encounter with another cave group, or you're dead. John and Sherry overestimated their abilities and thought that Hubbard's would be safe, since it was such a popular attraction. Venturing into the cave, they found the same formations that bewildered William Hubbard when he explored the cave. There were selenite needles that jabbed from the walls like strands of glass, cave hair formed by gypsum oozing out of small pores in the rock to make curly hairs or long strands of silky-looking rope, and they found many more otherworldly sights as they hiked deeper below. The pair twisted around the bends of the cave without realizing Hubbard's contains 3 major passages. Nearly 400 feet into the cave, they noticed one of their lights was flickering. They shook the flashlight and jostled the electronics around a bit like you would with an old remote. Maybe the batteries were dislodged, or there was something stuck in the contacts that jammed up the electrical current. The device looked fine, but it was pretty old. Most people have flashlights for convenience, not for emergencies. Flashlights are rarely replaced, and few people fork out the money for a quality device. One of them realized how old the flashlight was after noticing the once clear plastic was slightly yellow from sunlight exposure. Then, the flashlight completely turned off. For once on this unfortunate adventure, they made the right call and turned around to go back to the safety of the forest above. As they walked through the narrow archways and over slippery ground, the other would-be caver nervously laughed and mentioned their flashlight was also old. They said they'd buy a new one later and offered to go shopping together. But roughly halfway back, they realized their light was dimming. Then, a familiar sight made their hearts sink and their stomachs turn. Their last remaining torch began to flicker. With one last flare, their only remaining light source was extinguished. Once more, they made a sound decision to remain stationary and pray for help. When Sherry didn't return home that night, no one seemed to notice. She was an adult, and she could come and go as she pleased. But 2 days after the pair went missing, her family, the DeCrows, tried to contact her. They only got her voicemail. They tried her home, but she wasn't there either. Sherry's daughter, Ramia, convened with the rest of the family to discuss her mother's absence. Some thought she might have skipped town to marry her friend John, but others were afraid something terrible had happened to her. That night, they submitted a missing persons report to the Garfield County Sheriff's Department. Some members of her family thought her ex-husband could be to blame, so the police investigated him. The family suggested her ex was violent, and fear quickly spread about what he could have done to her. Of course, her ex-husband was a dead end, and he had alibis for the night of her disappearance. Knowing that Sherry would sometimes explore the outdoors, the Air National Guard ran a helicopter sweep of the river and other water sources to search for her body. This search turned up no results, and it also failed to find their vehicle, which was still parked at the trailhead. That's when the DeCrows started to butt heads with the police. They thought the investigators didn't do a thorough job, so they recruited a family friend to fly his personal plane in search for any signs of Sherry. After only 30 minutes in the air, this independent pilot found her Suburban parked at the trail in the Colorado wilderness. This spot and its connection to Hubbard's has been popular for over 100 years. The family immediately knew what happened, but they couldn't convince the police. In their eyes, deputies and others involved in the search should have immediately connected the dots that Sherry could have been inside Hubbard's cave. But instead of calling a rescue team, they taped off the parking lot as a possible crime scene. After far too long, days after Sherry and John got lost, a canine unit led police to Hubbard's cave. Reports suggest that the police had no idea how to proceed. They called for Sherry down the cold stone steps of the cave and shined their lights into the darkness, but they didn't venture inside. To make matters worse, they still didn't call a cave rescue team. Sherry's son and daughter said they would search the cave themselves and recruit cavers to guide them to find their mother. The chances of finding her alive continued to plummet every second. They knew she was inside and they needed to act immediately, but the police refused to grant entry into Hubbard's because of the already debunked fears about her ex and the possibility of foul play, which could endanger the lives of anyone entering the cave. Since it was considered a crime scene, they wouldn't allow anyone to potentially tamper with evidence, even though they could have escorted the rescuers to ensure they complied with procedures. The two camps argued until a thunderstorm rolled over the mountains and valleys of the area and the police disbanded the search party. Inside the cave, John and Sherry were struggling. The cold was numbing their rattling fingers and the darkness was messing with their heads. At first, they thought about what they would do when they got out, but by the third day they were crushed by hopelessness. Temperatures in Hubbard's cave dropped to as low as 3 degrees above freezing. Then, as the storm came through, rain started to trickle down overhead and little streams snaked over their shoes. They didn't see the water coming in the absolute darkness of the cave, and now they had to face the cold with wet clothes. But at least these muddy drops of water could keep them alive, for now. Like her family, Sherry even wondered if her vindictive husband could be to blame for their misfortune. John also had an angry ex. Did their divorced partners collude to sabotage their batteries on purpose? The thought struck fear into them. What if their exes were waiting outside? And what were they planning to do with them? Beyond fear and the cold, the pair also faced other challenges inside the tunnels. Hubbard's cave is at an elevation of 8,400 feet. Outside, the air is thinner and oxygen content is lower. It takes travelers days or weeks to adjust to the dry and thin atmosphere. They were used to it, but the body can only handle so much, and the oxygen inside the cave was even lower. They sat stationary, sucking all the fresh air from their surroundings. On top of all their other problems, the pair was slowly being poisoned by their own stagnant breath. By day 4, John was in bad shape. The two couldn't see how ragged they looked in the pitch blackness of the cave, but John's starvation and slow asphyxiation were becoming unbearable. If help didn't arrive soon, Hubbard's cave would become John's tomb. The thunderstorm battered the land for what felt like an eternity. The whole time, the DeCrows battled against the police to return and perform a rescue operation. Finally, after 4.5 days of Sherry's disappearance, police let the family and their team enter the cave. Of course, the police, who delayed the rescue for almost a week, sat outside. Even as the police watched people who had no idea how to properly explore caves enter the dark reaches of Hubbard's, they still didn't call an official rescue squad to aid them. The brave DeCrows weren't official rescuers. They had no gear. They lacked all the training cave rescuers dedicate their lives to learning and perfecting. But that day, they became rescuers. Armed with only crude flashlights and determination to find their missing family members, the team located Sherry and John only minutes after entering the cave. Because the group found Sherry so easily after entering the cave, that proved to the DeCrows that the police didn't even try to find her. After being gaslit for almost a week, the tension escalated into a fight between the police and the DeCrows. Allegedly, a detective choked one of the volunteers who joined the DeCrows to find the lost cavers. People on both sides held back the more aggressive members of each group, and eventually the threat of charges simmered the upset family members while John and Sherry were evaluated by medics. They were both exhausted and dehydrated. Their families explained the situation from their perspectives, which disgusted the fearful and shivering cavers. The medics noted they were weak and dehydrated, but they gave Sherry and John the choice to get hospitalized or return home. After seeing the fervor of their families, they opted to go home with them instead of traveling with emergency personnel. Home was a long way off, so the group stopped at a hotel to recover from the harrowing incident. It was later revealed that the sheriff never alerted local media outlets about Sherry's disappearance. The sheriff denied the cave rescue because he thought it could be a crime scene. But if that's the case, then why did he ignore a major component of a missing person's case? If he had given the public info on her car, it's likely that cavers or hikers would have found her Suburban the very next day after they went missing. The allegations of a detective choking a volunteer rescue were investigated by the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, and word spread throughout the nearby towns. Further adding fuel to the fire, the police insinuated that John and Sherry staged their rescue, despite the visible and medical evidence that they were battered and succumbing to exposure. The sheriff based his claim off of the inconclusive missing persons search, which involved members of the FBI. Sources indicate the team never properly explored the cave, which invalidates the validity of the search. His claim also relies on the medical evaluation that said the pair were fine, but the evidence seems to suggest the sheriff simply misunderstood the medic's evaluation. The medics have an obligation to prevent medical deterioration, but if John and Sherry got fluids, food, and rest, they should be fine. After seeing the tension between both groups, the medics could have made the call out of pity for Sherry and John. If they were sent to the hospital, they would be subjected to interviews from the police, which would only make them more upset. However, on the other hand, if Sherry and John got worse after leaving, the medics would be responsible for their condition. The medics would also be putting their necks on the line to lie to police. But from the reports, it seems like that the cavers and the police could have made mistakes, so it's also possible the medics dropped the ball as well. And in what seems like one final admission of incompetence, the sheriff said he knew the contact information of multiple Colorado cave rescue teams and the procedures for cave rescues, but in spite of the dogs leading them straight to Hubbard's, the sheriff claimed that he had, and I'm quoting, "no reason to presume John and Sherry were lost in a cave," end quote. The sheriff also said he still believed in his method and that he'd do it the same way again. Both the cavers and the sheriff highlight how ignorance can easily become the death of anyone daring to explore underground caves. If John and Sherry knew the dangers and prepared accordingly, they probably would have been fine. And if the sheriff really understood cave rescues, his decisions could have been different, and the pair could have been saved much faster. But, as the DeCrows and the volunteers showed, you don't have to be a professional to be a hero when it counts. The Hubbard's cave story is a wild oddity in the world of cave rescues. What do you think? Is there ever a good reason to avoid calling rescuers? Would you be brave enough to put it all on the line and go inside the dark mazes below ground? Along a remote stretch of coastline, more than 100 miles away from the capital city of Santo Domingo, El Dudu Lagoon is one of the finest natural attractions in the Dominican Republic. Visitors can enjoy swimming in fresh water, leaping off rocks, and even zooming across a zip line that covers the lagoon. But El Dudu is more than just an easygoing outdoor attraction. If you happen to dunk your head under the water, you'll see that the lagoon goes as deep as 66 feet. Not only that, but in its depths, the lagoon also hides a network of caves. Speleologists travel far and wide to this corner of the island so they can explore these daunting subterranean labyrinths. Sometimes this ends in disaster. In February of 2019, the world got a startling glimpse of just how disastrous that can be, when two experienced divers from Italy dove confidently into the darkness beneath El Dudu Lagoon and never returned. In this video, we'll explore the horrifying demise of two divers, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri, and study first-hand accounts from the rescue team to try and work out what really happened on that fateful day deep below the lush forest floor of the Dominican Republic. The event. On February 9th, 2019, at around 11:45 a.m., 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri and 44-year-old Carlos Basso entered the cave system beneath the waters of El Dudu Lagoon. Both were diving enthusiasts visiting from Italy. Despite having earned a reputation for doing dangerous cave dives around the world, neither man was diving certified. Ed Sorensen, who ended up working on their rescue mission, recalls hearing that an instructor in Italy had recently told Carlos Basso that he should consider getting proper training, to which Basso allegedly replied, quote, "There is nothing you could teach me that I don't already know." Now, whether Basso actually said this or not, it seems likely that it represents both his and Barbieri's attitudes. Without the proper certification, training, or all the necessary gear, both men plunged into the caves beneath El Dudu Lagoon, brimming with confidence from all their past successes. The underwater world which awaited them was something to behold. After descending deep into the lagoon itself, the pair would have eventually reached the mouth of the cave system. After navigating through some narrow passageways, and right past a highly conspicuous warning sign, the cave system begins to open up. A huge tunnel full of pillars, stalagmites, and stalactites winds even further and further into the bowels of the earth. Further on, the two reached a room in which there is actually an air pocket. Divers can swim up and emerge from the surface of the water to breathe fresh air, despite being located far below the surface of the lagoon where the journey began. The cave system winds and descends much, much further than this. Ambitious divers, which Basso and Barbieri both certainly were, can swim for a total of 45 minutes before finally reaching the end of the cave system. Much of the rest of the journey is significantly narrower and more cramped than the beginning. Unusually, the end of the line in El Dudu actually leads up to an alternative exit different from the place you entered, called Cueva de Lili. Divers exiting the cave via this route can expect to see bats, tarantulas, scorpions, and snakes. But whether they had planned on braving the creepy critters or not, Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso never made it there. The search. By mid-afternoon, the pair had still not re-emerged from the water. That's when word traveled to Philip Lehman. Lehman is the vice president of the Dominican Republic Speleological Society, or DRSS. Concerned, Lehman enlisted the help of a colleague named Angel Compres, and together the pair traveled to El Dudu. At the time, neither Lehman nor Compres knew what part of the cave system to look in. All they knew was that two divers were inside somewhere and they were probably in trouble. This was a daunting task given how vast El Dudu is. The first thing Lehman and Compres noticed upon entering the water was that a lot of silt had been stirred up. These fine particles can reduce visibility in underwater spaces to such a degree that it can be literally impossible to see anything in certain areas. This was obviously a hamper to their search, but it was also a clue. Silt can often be a factor or even a direct cause of many diving accidents. Working on this hunch, the pair were soon joined by El Dudu management and the local authorities from Cabrera, the town El Dudu was located in. The search team cleverly used the silt as a guide, figuring where there was more silt, there was probably a higher chance of the two divers. By following this trail of stirred-up silt, they eventually found a narrow passageway with very low visibility. Here, the search team found a broken guideline. This was a telltale sign that a serious accident had taken place. Unfortunately, using the silt as a map to the diver's location was a double-edged sword. Even though it led them to their first major clue, the visibility was so bad that they soon had to temporarily call off the search. The next day, the search team tried again. but visibility remained terrible and nothing was found. This continued for several days, with still no sign of either Carlos Barbieri or Carlos Basso. Then, finally, days after Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri had gone missing, the team made their first gruesome discovery. The body of 57-year-old Carlos Barbieri was found in a side passage. He was caught, and caught so badly that even though they'd found him, the team was unable to recover his body at the time. According to the National Speleological Society, this side passage is very narrow and is usually only attempted by divers using side mount gear. Barbieri didn't bring side mount gear. Following the discovery of Carlos Barbieri, more than a week went by with virtually no progress. At this point, they decided it was time to call in additional help. That's when Mike Young and internationally renowned rescue diver Ed Sorensen were called out to the Dominican Republic. The rescue. The heroic arrival of experts Ed Sorensen and Mike Young were interrupted in transit by an unexpected setback. Upon arriving at the border of the Dominican Republic, local authorities told the two men they weren't allowed into the country. This, while Carlos Barbieri's body remained lodged in the side passage, and Carlos Basso remained missing in the depths of the El Dudu cave system. In a report later published by the National Speleological Society, the reason for this is sort of strange. Apparently, the government was not only aware of the diving accident, but aware of the fact that the rescue mission was ongoing, and had been for well over a week. But they were wary of letting two American rescue divers in to help, because they assumed if it had taken this long already, the operation must have been way too dangerous. After some hasty negotiations, and maybe showing the local authorities his track record, Ed Sorensen and his partner Mike Young were allowed into the Dominican Republic. However, they were allowed in on one condition. They only had 8 days to recover both bodies. After 8 days, the authorities would call off the search for good. Recounting the story later, Sorensen describes how he brought special harnesses with which to extract the bodies. These harnesses were designed to wrap around at numerous different points on the body, for the horrific reason that, after being trapped and submerged for so many days, they may not come out in one piece. Due to the silt and the labyrinth-like nature of the cave system, Sorensen describes how he explored the cave. He held onto his guideline with one hand and held his other hand out in front of him, essentially feeling around for things that weren't made out of sand, water, or rock. He says he found the still-trapped body of Carlos Barbieri by literally bumping into him. Sorensen couldn't extract the body on his own, so he sent for the local crew to bring down a bunch of milk crates full of weights. These weights helped pull Barbieri's body down just enough to maneuver it out from under the section of the passage he was stuck in. Finally, after about 4 hours of grueling work, the deceased Barbieri had been recovered. But even now, nobody knew where the body of the younger Carlos Basso was. The day after the exhausting recovery of Carlos Barbieri, Ed Sorensen and Mike Young headed back into the cave. They continued their search in the same area, venturing slowly deeper into the very furthest depths of El Dudu. Sorensen actually reached a wall at the very back of the passageway before he found the body of Carlos Basso. Basso was down in a crevice. In order to reach him, Sorensen had to let go of the guideline. He held on to Mike Young, who held on to the guideline for both of them, while he worked with one hand to try and recover the body of Carlos Basso. Unlike the first body, this time Sorensen was able to extract the body without additional help. However, due to the extreme depths at which the body was found, the whole recovery again took approximately 4 hours. The aftermath. Even though there are some clear red flags in their story, to this day, authorities still don't know conclusively what went wrong with Carlos Barbieri and Carlos Basso. Overconfidence, and the fact that both men lacked proper training and proper equipment surely played a role, but the specific events that transpired to lead to their grisly demise remain the subjects of speculation. The report of the incident, done by the National Speleological Society, speculates that as they were nearing the end of their air supply, one of the men, either Basso or Barbieri, got tangled in the line and broke it, making them unable to find their way out. Another theory put forward is that they mistakenly began following a jump line, a different line left behind by other divers thinking it was their own. Either way, the report stresses that neither Basso nor Barbieri should have been in El Dudu in the first place, especially so deep. Not only did their lack of certification and equipment result in their own deaths, but it also left their bodies in an insane situation that put the lives of the rescue workers at risk as well. In the end, like other tragic tales of divers meeting their demise, Carlos Basso and Carlos Barbieri serve today as a cautionary tale for divers of all experience levels to never overestimate their abilities. As the saying goes, the wolf is always at the door. We hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Tell us, provided you had the proper equipment and proper training, would you consider exploring the caves in El Dudu? Or would you rather stick to riding the zip line on the surface?
The Marble Arch cave system is one of the largest in Ireland. Since its discovery back in the 18th century, the Marble Arches have become a world-renowned show cave thanks to the beautiful limestone karst that adorns the ceilings of the cave's main chamber. But even though the cave has been well developed with plenty of safety features added over the years, the cave still remains a dangerous place for would-be explorers. In 1995, a group of 10 cavers found themselves trapped in a section known as Cradle Hole, which sparked a huge rescue operation. And since then, there have been many more rescues over the years in Ireland's Marble Arches. Grab your lamps and brace yourself as we find out who made it out of the Marble Arches, and as we mourn those that weren't lucky enough to escape the deadly tunnels deep beneath the Irish wilderness. In 1732, Reverend and Dean of Killaloe, William Henry, became the first person to publish a written history of the above-ground section of the cave in his book, A Natural History of the Parish of Killashire, by Rev. William Henry, rector of it. In his book, he wrote about the spring of water where the Claddagh River exits the underground aquifer and continues its flow on the surface. He also describes 3 large sinkholes that would later lead spelunkers to discover the Marble Arches. William Henry descended into one of the sinkholes, but he only made it about 300 feet into the cave before returning back to the surface. Over 100 years later, in 1895, Lister Jameson and Edward Alfred Martel ventured over 1,000 feet into the cave using a canvas boat. During their expedition, they found the place where the Sru Croppa, Owen Breen, and Aganron rivers meet. The path took them to the Grand Gallery, and they traveled further to the cave's pool chamber. The oldest parts of the cave contain uranium minerals, which were found to be 320,000 years old. These minerals were present in the ground long before the birth of the Marble Arch caves. Later, samples of pollen near the sandy banks of cave show that the main sections date back between 35,000 and 75,000 years. The Marble Arches are the perfect place to learn about the geology of caves with their wide spectrum of formations like vadose passages, speleothems, boulder fields, and phreatic tubes. By the early 1900s, cavers started exploring the plateau and found a pit cave next to the 3 larger sinkholes on the plateau. Descending into this pothole showed a new entrance to the pool chamber. In 1908, the Yorkshire Ramblers Exploration, Mountaineering, and Caving Club conducted a test to map the underground water flow between multiple cave systems in the area. They used red dye to find that the Aganron River connected to Upper Cradle Hole, which extended the size of the Marble Arches. Following their work in the Marble Arches, the Yorkshire Ramblers Club has continued to make surveys and explore landscapes all around the world, both above and below ground. The discovery of the connection at Cradle Hole was monumental. Cradle Hole itself was a natural wonder, and it would become one of the most defining parts of the Marble Arches caves. Cradle Hole is a 492 feet by 328 feet doline that's divided into an upper and lower portion by various sumps. Lower Cradle Hole has a triple-layered series of passages that connects to the main chamber with numerous hidden passages which connect to Upper Cradle via a 524 feet long underwater passage. The Cradle Hole area is a destination for cave divers who can explore the cave's various sumps, but only skilled divers should attempt the feat since the water is cold and heavy. Rainfalls can froth the water, leading to dangerous currents and low visibility. Cradle Hole's challenging terrain and alluring experience would become the site of the first major incident in the history of the Marble Arches. Decades after the connection to Cradle Hole was discovered, in 1995, a group of 10 explorers ventured into Lower Cradle Hole. The group was part of the caving team from the Dublin Institute of Technology. The team entered the cave at 1 p.m. on Sunday, January 15th. They were trying to reach the grand gallery of the Marble Arch Cave when sudden rainfall filled the underground sumps. The rush of water created a strong undertow that dragged 2 members of the team underwater in a section known as a duck, a low-level tunnel. One of the cavers who noticed the missing members was part of the Irish Cave Rescue Organization, or ICRO. The ICRO is a team of volunteers that's over 100 members strong. The ICRO provide rescue services and first aid training across the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the UK. The ICRO officials searched the area but couldn't locate the 2 missing cavers. The duck where the 2 explorers fell had a current that flowed into the chamber at the Marble Arches, so there was hope that they might make it through. But as time passed, it became clear that they were unable to navigate in the swirling water. Rescue divers were dispatched downstream at the Grand Gallery to swim through the ducks from the other direction, where they discovered the bodies of the 2 missing explorers. But the tragedy didn't end there. Shortly after they found the 2 college spelunkers, another member was reported missing. The team frantically spread out to search through all available ducts and flooded passageways, but they were unable to locate the 3rd person. In response, the ICRO called in backup, and the RUC Mountain Rescue Team was also dispatched. To aid in the search, the Royal Air Force scrambled a helicopter to search the sinkholes and other exits. The storm continued to worsen, and the search was called off for the night. After the flooding subsided, they found the body of the 3rd caver almost 100 feet downstream from the ducts they were searching in. The Cradle Hole tragedy claimed the lives of 21-year-old Conleth Cormacan, 20-year-old Philip Marshall, and 22-year-old Brian Patrick Kennedy. The entrance to the ducts where the men perished have since been grated shut, and a memorial plaque was placed in their honor. The 1995 Cradle Hole incident may have been the most famous attempted rescue operation in the history of the Marble Arches, but the cave and its surrounding system continues to be the site of rescues over the years. In 2009, a Polish caver and resident of Ireland was exploring in the Polprulish Cave near the popular entrance to the Marble Arches. He was 250 feet below the surface when he found himself trapped in the cave's cold, dark catacombs after a tunnel partially collapsed. Thankfully, his 2 caving partners were free to call for help. The ICRO and the Police Service of Northern Ireland were dispatched with drills to free him. The drills weren't getting the job done, so they brought in explosives to blast apart the wreckage. It took the team 20 hours, but they reached the Polish caver, who was rattled but unharmed. On a Friday evening in December of 2014, 2 men were visiting the Marble Arches when they wandered off the beaten path. They climbed up to the rocky cliffs above the visitor site when they went missing. The Northern Ireland Ambulance Service and the Northwest Mountain Rescue were dispatched alongside traditional rescue crews. News outlets sounded the alarm of the missing men, and above ground, a raging blizzard disrupted the rescue effort. Eventually, emergency personnel made miraculous contact with the men after they called for help on their cell phones. Normally, caves are insulated by hundreds of feet of solid stone that make them impenetrable to cell phone signals. But, thanks to the development of the cave, the signals were boosted near the visitor area, which gave the men just enough reception bars to make the call. Through their communication, the rescue team was able to guide the 2 men back to safety, and neither of them had any injuries other than the biggest scare of their lives. 4 years later in 2018, a party of 4 went caving in the Marble Arch Natural Reserve on Easter weekend. The team split into groups of 2 and went out to explore different areas. They agreed to meet back at their camp at nightfall, but only 1 pair showed up. After waiting for a few tense hours, the pair called the ICRO to their campsite at the Quecreek Mountain. The ICRO sent a 12-person team into the Marble Arches with another 10 on standby in case the search was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, the Northwest Mountain Rescue Team sent 11 people into the above-ground wilderness in search of the lost man and woman. Thankfully, the cavers were well prepared with documented plans for their routes, which helped the rescue efforts. Even with a clear starting point, it still took the team 7 grueling hours in the dead of night to track down the missing cavers. The rescue team finally made contact with the pair in the Cascades Rising Cave and guided them to the surface. The 2 were cold and wet, but they were happy to be saved. The Marble Arches underwent development in the late 1900s to turn the main cave into a tourist destination. Concrete walkways were installed, lighting systems were added, guardrails were placed, and stairs and metal tunnels were created to make the cave safer for visitors. There's even a unique dining experience for adventurous foodies. All known entrances to the cave have since been sealed with gates to prevent unauthorized access and to help prevent accidents. The more exotic and untouched portions of the cave remain open to brave explorers and researchers, but only upon permission from the cave management team. The management team at the Marble Arches occasionally hosts emergency planning exercises to help cavers, employees, researchers, and interested people who want to learn crucial survival tips during underground emergencies. In 2018, 10 organizations took part in the exercise, including the Irish Cave Rescue Organization, fire rescue teams, and even the Coast Guard. Since rescue operations often involve multiple agencies, routine exercises like these help the different organizations work better together to avoid bureaucratic snags and communication errors during critical life-saving windows. The Marble Arches are one of the best caving tourist attractions in Ireland. The cave's gorgeous structures and intricate tunnels attract novices and veterans from all across the world. But even though it's got well-developed sections with tons of safety features, the cave still remains dangerous for those who wander off in the twisting, slippery caverns deep below ground.